Hello, everyone. My name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network, and I'm so pleased to be introducing this live call with you today. We'll be exploring practicing compassion, an antidote to these challenging times, with one of my favorite teachers, Thupten Jinpa. Jinpa is a leading teacher of compassion who bridges Eastern and Western and ancient and modern approaches to understanding and practicing compassion. He has a unique background serving as the principal English translator to His Holiness the Dalai Lama since 1985 and was trained as a monk at the Sartse College of Ganden Monastic University and also holds a BA in philosophy and a PhD in religious studies from Cambridge University. He's the author of A Fearless Heart, How the Courage to be Compassionate Can Transform Our Lives, and is also the principal creator of Compassion Cultivation Training, CCT, which he developed while at Stanford University in 2009, and is now offered through the Compassion Institute, which he also co-founded in 2017. And in addition to the Compassion Institute's traditional 8-week training, Jinpa has just finished creating a new shorter 2-week online class called Building Compassion from the Inside Out to support people in all walks of life in discovering more meaning, purpose, and joy in their lives through compassion training. Thank you so much for joining us, Jinpa. I think you're still muted.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this, Kaylee.
And so before I turn it over to you, Jinpa, I just wanted to share a few more details with the participants watching. I wanted to let everyone know that we'll have translations into multiple languages up on the recording of this video through the subtitles on YouTube shortly after it closes. And if you're looking for closed captions in English, they are currently available in an automated form on this live call. So thank you for your patience for the recording. And thank you to everyone who wrote into our pre-Zoom survey. It's been very touching to read all of your questions, and it's really helped to inform the tone for this call today. Jinpa will begin in just a few moments by leading us in a short 5 to 10 minute guided meditation. And then we'll be speaking about how we can practice compassion during these challenging times. At about 45 minutes past the hour, we'll be taking the live Q&A portion of this call and hearing some of your questions. Jinpa's really excited to hear your questions and what challenges and inspirations are coming up for you. So please don't be shy to ask. When we get to that section, I'll give some more specific instructions. And also after the Q&A, I'm also really excited to say that we'll have a few minutes to hear about the two-week course that I mentioned, Building Compassion from the Inside Out. And the first cohort for that course will be starting in just over a week. So obviously, this has been an extraordinarily challenging time on so many different levels, and clearly our world is longing for more compassion. So I'm really grateful and delighted that you're joining us today, Jinpa. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kaylee. And I would like to express my gratitude to the Awake Network Foundation for, at the beginning for hosting this and also offering me and the Compassion Institute this platform and your community to really give me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts about compassion. And so at the beginning, as you said that, and I would like to express my appreciation to all of you, who are joining live, who have chosen to take some time off from this Saturday, which is a day off, and deciding to spend their time together, deeply thinking about compassion and how can we bring this, not just in our own personal life, but also into the larger world. So at the beginning, I would like to sort of invite everybody to join me in a very brief reflective practice, and then I will follow up with my remarks and sharing my thoughts. So for this, find a comfortable posture. All of you are familiar with the basic kind of, preparation for doing a contemplative practice. If you are not, then find a comfortable posture, whether you are sitting on a chair or on the ground, and keep your spine straight, unless you have a medical condition. But otherwise, allowing spine straight facilitates a kind of a posture of alertness. So once we have adopted that posture, if you wish, you can close your eyes and just feel grounded and just feel the energy of your body slowing down. And if you choose, you can use your breathing as an anchor to rest your attention so that your mind is not just going everywhere. And if not, just imagine listening to a deep silence inside you. Because for some of you, paying conscious attention to breathing at this moment of pandemic situation may be triggering. So in which case, you can choose to listen to a silence inside you. So let's do this very briefly. Just feel the energy of your body and mind slowing down. As if you are turning down a volume of a music or something. Just feel that energy. And see if you can sense that emerging peace inside you. A kind of silence, serenity. Okay, now with our mind a little bit settled, I would like to invite you to bring to your mind a moment or a time when you were able to truly feel connected with someone. Could be your spouse, a child, a colleague in need, or a total stranger who is going through a tough time. And if no specific memory comes up, that's also okay. You can bring up an image of a suffering right now. There is no shortage of such memory right now. Just allow your heart to open. Sense that connection you feel. And a natural sense of concern that arises in you. This capacity to care for someone is really coming deep from within. It's a natural part of who we are. So let's now be more courageous and consciously extend that sense of caring, sense of concern to those who are right now going through a very tough time, such as in India. In my case, that's the topmost in my mind because of my connection of having been brought up there. So there are many other places in the world where right now, so many are going through a very tough time. Loss of loved ones, economic difficulties, feeling of confusion, uncertainty, fear, powerlessness. We can do this. Let's open our heart and extend that sense of concern that we are naturally capable of. And silently offer the phrases, may you find courage. May you keep your hope. May you overcome your current suffering. May you be okay. So let's now include the entire world, where everybody, every part of the world is still going through a very difficult time. This is a shared human experience of suffering at the collective level, individually, and at the level of society as well. And let's include ourselves in this group and silently offer, say the following phrases. May we find courage. May we retain our hope. May we overcome this current suffering. And may we be well. So let's stay a little with the energy of these thoughts. Okay, now I invite you to bring your attention back on your breathing, noticing the air coming in and out, and then back into your body, noticing the points where we feel contact, like your palms resting on your knees, and so on. And when you are ready, you can open your eyes now. So what we just went through, which I invited you to join, is to really recall a moment of experience in our life where we are able to really pay attention and bring awareness to something that is very powerful, but that is naturally present in us. That is the capacity to care for someone other than ourselves. And this really, the capacity to care for, other than ourselves is really a very fundamental part of who we are. So in the old days, it is the spiritual traditions that had language for this. For example, in Buddhist tradition, we speak of basic goodness. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, particularly in the Christian tradition, one speaks of the spark of divinity, the divinity within. But now in science, there's beginning to be language for this. For example, and part of that is coming from the realization of what are the implications of human beings being deeply social creatures. And the social creature requires relationality and a connection. And that's one of the reasons why there is such a powerful connection between compassion and well-being and happiness, which is often seen as a paradox because compassion involves paying attention, making a fuss about someone else's suffering. So commonsensically, one would think, well, why take on additional suffering if I can't handle my own suffering? But it turns out, paradoxically, by stepping out of our own narrow self-concerns and being concerned about others really opens up the courage. So there is a connection, and that comes through the social reality of who we are. There is some of you may be familiar, there's a powerful series of experiments done at Yale Infant Cognition Study Center, where children before speaking age, a couple of months old, are capable of distinguishing between helpers and hinderers. And you can go on the YouTube and find those videos. But in brief, what it suggests is that children have a natural preference for helpers than hinderers. And so it seems as if right from the beginning, we are capable of distinguishing between the goodies and the baddies. There seems to be a rudimentary moral sense in us. So these are ways in which modern science is now showing us how impulse for compassion, impulse for kindness is so deeply rooted. And I think it is really important in these days, particularly when often there are so many things happening in the world that makes us feel down, to really shine the spotlight on that part of who we are, embrace it, celebrate it. Here I remember something that really struck me powerfully when I was a young monk in Southern India, at one of the teachings of His Holiness. And he was talking about the opportunity that the human existence affords us to do things. And this is part of a Buddhist discourse, traditional Tibetan Buddhist discourse. But one thing that he said that really struck me was that he said that every morning, he feels gratitude for the fact that as a human being, he can contemplate the virtues and the benefits of altruistic intention, that he can speak about them, use language, inspire others by sharing his enthusiasm about the benefits of altruistic intention. For me, that really struck me as a young monk. And this also reminds me of something that the 8th century Buddhist master Shantideva, who is, by the way, probably the most influential resource on compassion for the Tibetan Buddhists. His book, Guide to the Bodhisattva Way, is a real classic. I had the privilege to memorize this text when I was 12, 13. But in this text, he says that the Buddhas have contemplated for eons. And one thing they have found, is that altruistic intention alone is the highest source of benefit. It says that with altruistic intention, those who wish to do good for a larger society can, do it. Those who wish to relieve sufferings of many can do it. And those who even wish joy for themselves, they can achieve through altruistic intention. And I think that's very powerful. And in these days, I think it is important to really pay conscious attention to this and embrace this part of who we are. And as much as possible, try to ground our sense of self-worth in appreciation of that, because that quality and capacity is universal. Everybody has it. We don't have to somehow seek and boost our self-esteem by, putting down others and pushing up ourselves. We can really take joy and take pride in being a human being and having that natural capacity. So I think, this is probably one of the reasons why His Holiness was talking about, how he expresses gratitude for the fact that he, as a human being, he can contemplate on this. I think in these days, I think it's really important, and especially for those who are struggling with self-compassion issues, beating themselves or being harsh upon themselves. I think, having a solid intrinsic sense of self-worth grounded in embracing their, social nature, I think is a powerful way to, address that problem. Another important thing that compassion does is that compassion is a powerful buffer against loneliness. Again, loneliness is, even before the pandemic, loneliness was a major societal issue, a problem, a crisis. Even people talk about, epidemics of loneliness. But in pandemics, these factors for loneliness has even become more enhanced. We were forced to restrain expressing our social nature. We have to observe social isolation. And particularly in the West, I know where I live, because of our emphasis on autonomy, quite often people live alone, if you're not married and have kids. So during this period, although being alone need not necessarily lead to loneliness, because you can think of the hermits in the mountains, who are alone but not lonely. But the fact that we live alone can contribute to that loneliness. And loneliness really kills. So I don't want to go into the details of this, but loneliness is a major source of, problem, health, longevity, and all of these problems. So compassion can be a powerful, buffer against loneliness, because compassion at the core of it is a feeling of connection with someone. And when you feel connection with someone, that completely prevents the rising of loneliness, because loneliness is an experience of alienation and lack of connection with others. So I think embracing compassion, paying more attention, trying to live from that place will be a powerful antidote against loneliness, a prevention of that. Another important point is that, compassion can be a very powerful factor for making our mind more resilient. And here, I think the way in which it does is that I think compassion fosters courage in us, because compassion demands us to step out of our shell of self, focus and make connection beyond ourselves to someone. And also compassion, and when we do that, His Holiness talks about how when compassion arises, he says the inner door opens. And when the inner door opens, it's easier to reach out and to others. I think that's very beautiful imagery of when compassion and loving kindness arising, heart kind of literally opening up, facilitating that reaching out to someone. And when you reach out to someone, you're stepping out. And in this way, what also happens is that when you are able to see your own experience and situation in the context of shared human experience, then even though we may have problem, the problem of course doesn't go away, but we then find a completely different perspective on the problem that we have. Generally, when we relate to problems from a purely self, focus, problems tend to appear so huge in front of us. Whereas when we are able to situate ourselves in the context of other, people in our lives, then that, sort of this intensity that comes from, feeling alone is taken off. That edge is taken off, which then gives us more space to even see our problem in a particular way and deal with it. And therefore it fosters resilience and courage. So that's a very important, factor that I think is something to keep in mind. And then the third thing is that, and for me, one of the most important things that compassion gives is a sense of purpose and meaning. And, we deep down, the science says we are rational creatures, we're emotional creatures, we're social creatures, but I would argue we are also meaning-seeking moral creatures. And that this is true is because many of you who unfortunately if you happen to ever work in a workplace where you find conflict with your own personal values, just imagine the pain that you have experienced. And that pain is coming from the fact that you have a set of values and then the workplace is coming up against that. This is a powerful indication that we are moral beings. Values matter to us, and values and meaning, and often people would rather give up high-paying job to find another job where they can find more meaning and purpose. This is not being irrational. This is being actually smart, because we are meaning-seeking creatures. And there is nothing more powerful than, embracing compassion to open up that space for greater meaning. Because the meaning really comes from finding our own sense of worth through the experience of service, the practice of service. This is one of the reasons why, the most spiritual traditions, ancient traditions, encourage generosity and service. They have hit upon powerful insights of human experience. So for me, I think of all the virtues of compassion, the sense of purpose it brings and the meaning that it fosters is for me the most powerful one. And then finally, one very important factor of compassion, which we really need right now, is that compassion can bring a kind of a clarity when we are experiencing emotional and moral confusion. And right now, many people are. During the pandemic, there were many who were unfortunate, suffered economically very deeply. I mean, I have family members in India, I have family members living in New York, some of them driving yellow cabs and so on. And, I know that, people have experienced economic dislocation in disproportionate way. But many people actually have made more money, saved more money. Like, the simple fact that we couldn't go out and spend, in restaurants and stuff. So, and then some of us who have been in the more fortunate camp of not suffering immediate drastic economic devastation probably feel guilty. So there's a kind of a confusion. And furthermore, in the wake of new awakening of social justice issues, systemic biases that are being revealed, the law enforcement brutality that is being revealed. And on top of that, the acrimonious discourse that is happening in the extreme political division that is being seen in different parts of the world. I think many of us are feeling confused. How am I supposed to even think about these things? And on our own personal level too, sometimes we feel morally confused. So in these kind of situations, particularly if people are feeling guilty, I think bringing compassion is the antidote. Guilt is a funny sentiment. Guilt is a powerful moral sentiment. It is important because people who cannot feel guilty can be dangerous. But on the other hand, if you stay in the state of guilt for too long, then it becomes dysfunctional, because guilt is, by its very nature, self-focused. It's about yourself. It's about your discomfort, moral discomfort. So if you embrace compassion, then the guilt can become a powerful motivation to reach out and help. And generosity is the powerful expression of that compassion. So you can transform the feeling of guilt by compassion into a generous spirit. And some people are in a position to share financially, other people are not so, but then you can share by paying attention, offering services, helping. I think it's, compassion really has that power. And similarly, if you are struggling to get a handle on how am I supposed to understand these social issues that are being thrown in the news every time, I think a simple way to cut through this confusion is to ask yourself, how would I look at this if I'm to bring the lens of compassion? Whether it is the systemic bias issue, social justice issue, climate change issue, how would I need to think about this if I really bring compassion as a key perspective and attitude to this? So in this way, and similarly in your own personal feeling of guilt too, I think asking question, how can I change this if I bring compassion? And the same thing goes to interpersonal challenges and difficulties as well. A parent to child, handling a difficult, teenage, child who's constantly challenging your authority as a parent, In these situations, there is nothing more clarifying than asking yourself the question, what is the most compassionate thing to do here? So I think in these ways, I think we can really see how compassion can be a powerful, really kind of, a resource as an antidote, but also as a kind of a creation of a spaciousness in us. So what we find in the Buddhist tradition, particularly, of course, compassion as a spiritual value is universal. It is extolled in all the great traditions, not just religious, but also in the humanistic traditions. But where we see kind of a special contribution from the Buddhist tradition, which is where I come from, is the kind of, to use a kind of a common language, a technology it offers in actually paying deeper attention, being more granular in sort of differentiating the components that make up compassion. And then once you're able to differentiate the components that make up compassion, then finding ways in which each of these components can be strengthened, enhanced, developed, cultivated, and then applied. So in this sense, Buddhism has a rich resource. But having said that, I truly believe that to be able to use these resources to cultivate our natural compassion, I don't think you need very specifically Buddhist beliefs. In the end, we are talking about a fundamental human reality. And that, just as we went through the meditation, this capacity to care is there. We did not learn it. It's there naturally. The only difference is that it is up to us whether to pay conscious attention to it, embrace it, and make it a more powerful force. Because we also have many other competing forces in us. We can choose others, like a hatred and so on, but we can choose compassion, which is part of our nature. So there, I think, the technology, some of the techniques that have been developed, such as by Shantideva and His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, I had the privilege to serve him and travel extensively with him. In his general public talks, he is drawing extensively from his Buddhist wisdom and experience and techniques, but offering on a secular setting, secular in the more universal sense, because sometimes the word secular gets confused by, anti-religious kind of perspective, but secular in the more inclusive, universal sense. So I think there are clearly techniques and insights that can be applied. And the beauty of this is if we are able to embrace, first of all, become aware of our natural compassion, bring attention to it consciously, okay? And then really kind of choose to make it a basic standpoint, a perspective from which we relate to the world. Instead of using judgment and other, elements as a way of seeing the world, but rather seeing the world primarily through the standpoint of compassion, which is grounded in common human experience. And then if we also choose to bring compassion as a key motivation, because motivations are more at the level of emotion, and motivations sometimes are not obvious to us, why we do certain things. Freud has been very insightful in letting us know that many of our motivations are even not conscious to ourselves. So, and that is a powerful insight. But, therefore, when we respond to situation, as human beings, we are complex creatures, we can tap into motivations that are coming from a fear-based, threat detection. We can tap into motivation that has to do with competition, greed, acquisition, grabbing it, so that's another part of motivation, pleasure seeking. But we can also tap into a motivation that is also similarly very fundamental, which is seeking nurturing, seeking connection, seeking soothing. That's another set of motives. So we have different motivation systems in us, and compassion belongs to this third category, seeking connection, nurturing, and soothing. So if we are able to choose that as our motivation when we relate to, whether it is our relationship with our loved ones in our life, like spouses, our children, our parents or our colleagues as well, we have the choice. In the heat of a moment, of course, it's very difficult to exercise the choice. But generally, we do have a choice to tap into which system of motivation we choose. But if we're able to choose compassion as our primary motivation source, then we can clearly, be evolved to a point where actually we can begin to appreciate the qualities that people like someone like His Holiness demonstrates. And Archbishop Desmond, it's nothing specifically uniquely Buddhist. Archbishop Desmond Tutu also demonstrates these qualities, which is at the individual personal level, there is a deep settledness, a kind of a peace. They worry about the world, but the personal level, there isn't that kind of angst. There is a deep settledness. There is also a powerful courage in them. And at the same time, there is a tremendous sense of meaning and purpose, and also joy. So those are there. And here, it reminds me of a beautiful verse in one of the Tibetan teachings text, especially in the mind training tradition, where Master Atisha says that, for someone for whom, whether you're in a hostile environment or a friendly environment, the conditions which normally give rise to strong negative emotional reaction, if anyone who is able to see these situations as a source of spiritual learning, such a person can find joy no matter where he or she is. I think that's a powerful idea. And we can see this as a proof you need in people like His Holiness. I mean, we can see this. I have had the privilege to be with him, serve him very closely for many years. And I know that he displays that kind of, quality. So I think, and they, we like to think that for the Tibetans, of course, His Holiness is unique, but from a more secular perspective, he's another human being. So if he can do it, we should be able to do it. It's a matter of, the ingredients are there in us. And I truly believe that if we, tap into this power of compassion that is in us, I think there is, there is a kind of a statement attributed to the Buddha in the Tibetan tradition, which says that, what is that one virtue? When you have it in your hand, you have all the other virtues in your hand. And the Buddha says it's compassion. Now that may seem like a little exaggeration, but I truly believe it is true. It's, they have, among the numerous virtues that are there, I think compassion really grounds everything. So if we are, and the beautiful thing of compassion is we don't have to learn it. It's there in us. We do need to train it to be able to make it more intentional, bring it, more conscious, and also bring awareness to it. But as an impulse, the mental quality itself, it is there in us. So I think, this way of thinking about compassion, I think it's really helpful. At least, these are things that I myself do. And, I am no longer a monk. I live a lay person like everybody else, paying the bills, making a living, raising kids. So, and I find in my everyday life, looking after my aging, in-laws, I think I find these teachings and these thoughts and attitudes really powerful and helpful. And at the end of the day, if you can live a life with joy and purpose, and also create that energy around you, people around you also, get sort of, in some sense, sort of, experience a taste of that as well. And it is in this way that His Holiness envisions we can create a more compassionate society in a kind of a horizontally, not horizontally, horizontally, not vertically, from one individual to others, and kind of a ripple effect type. So, and that's why I truly believe that, paying more attention to compassion and bringing deeper understanding to it, just not leaving that this is one thing that we have, and so what kind of thing. I think just making a fuss about it, embracing it, celebrating it, really can be a turning point in our individual personal life. So thank you.
Jinpa, thank you so much for that beautiful practice and such inspiring words.
Thank you.
So we're going to take some questions from the community now. And in order to do that, what we're going to be doing is have folks ask their questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the page if you're on Zoom. And we're actually going to be having people come on with their video and audio enabled so they can ask their question directly.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And so to do that, if you're interested in asking your question live with your video and audio, you can go ahead and write in the Q&A and write live in all caps at the beginning of your question so that we know you have a functioning microphone and camera and that you're wanting to come on. Then write your name, where you're from, and finally your question. And so we'll be sorting through those and bringing a few folks on in just a moment. And if we choose your question, it'll take about 5 minutes, and then you'll hear me call your name and we'll bring you on right after that. So please be ready and make sure you're going to be on the call if you go ahead and write in. And so as people are writing their questions, I'll go ahead and read a question for you, Jinpa, that Sandra wrote in through our pre-Zoom survey before this call. So Sandra says, "Dear Thupten Jinpa, could you speak a little on how empathy and compassion are different and yet interact with each other?"
Thank you. That's a really important question. And one of the things that this is where science becomes such a powerful ally in this spread of, appreciating the value of compassion. Although in the past, in the Buddhist tradition, there was some differentiation between the two, but it was not that clear. But science is now showing us that empathy and compassion are deeply interconnected, but they're actually quite distinct. And so the one simple way of looking at this is something that it's a little exaggeration, but I think it's a helpful one. This is from two doctors who wrote a powerful book making the case for bringing compassion into the healthcare systems. And the book is called Compassionomics. And the idea here is that compassion should be the interface that connects the science of medicine with the art of medicine, the practice of medicine. So that's the title of the book. So in their book, they say empathy is feeling and compassion is action. Now, that's a little bit of simplification, but I think it captures something very profound, because empathy really involves emotional connection with the need or the suffering of the other. So empathy has two aspects. One is the cognitive, which is the understanding the situation, sometimes referred to as perspective taking or cognitive empathy. The other one is referred to as affective empathy or emotional resonance. So it's a sort of a feeling for or feeling with. So you feel distress. So when you experience empathy, one would expect some element of distress if the empathy is towards a suffering person. So when you're in empathy, there is a very strong emotional component. Now, when compassion arises, an additional factor kicks in, which is the motivational part. There's a strong wish to do something yourself or wanting to see the situation changed. So even in the brain, when compassion kicks in, they see that the action regions of the brain gets more activated. Whereas empathy alone doesn't show that. So even at the level of brain, there seems to be a distinction. So one of the implications of this is that, through compassion training like CCT and others, one can learn to regulate the empathy so that empathy does not, because empathy, when it arises, it has two routes. It can turn into a personal distress called empathic distress or personal distress because you can't handle it. You get overwhelmed. Or it can go into compassion, which then leads to pro-social behavior, helping behavior. So empathy can go into two different routes. So in the end, empathy is a beautiful quality because empathy is what makes us able to connect and feel concern. But empathy, if it is not regulated, and excessive empathy is then a cause for burnout. So that's one of the reasons why compassion trainings are proving to be quite effective. And particularly for caregivers, there's a big study that came out recently, actually this year, based on a Danish study of two separate communities, but in Denmark. And these are studies on informal caregivers. These are family members who have mentally challenged, mentally ill person, a family member. They're looking after them all the time. So there were about 160 people in the study, and so the randomized and two groups received in two different locations the training CCT 8-week, and the others were waitlisted and they were compared. And to cut a long story short, the results was those who have taken compassion training, they scored quite high again on protection against depression, anxiety, and stress. And not only that, but also that effect was noticeable 6 months after the training was over. So you can see how some way learning skills and insights to regulate that empathy, but not using suppression, because sometimes, like the physicians, they use suppression as a way of protecting themselves. And the suppression then can be another factor for burnout. So there are three main factors for burnout. One is emotional exhaustion, which is excessive empathy or being overwhelmed. The other one is depersonalization, where you choose the opposite, which is to suppress your emotional response and turn the patient into a number, patient in room 4 or whatever it is, and not making the human connection. And if you do that day in and day out, that is also leads to a condition for burnout. So this is called depersonalization. And the third is a sense of powerlessness. So not having enough agency, feeling of agency. So empathy and compassion distinction is really crucial. But I notice sometimes, one or two of my colleagues, because of this, seem to be, presenting this case in a way that could be misunderstood as giving empathy a bad reputation, which I think is not a skillful way, because without empathy, I don't think there is a route to compassion. So empathy is what opens us to compassion, because empathy allows us to feel concern. So, but on the other hand, excessive empathy, unregulated, can also be a source of suffering. And if you get emotionally exhausted, then you are no longer available for others. So I think the ability to regulate makes a huge difference. But this is a very important question. Thank you.
Thank you, Jinpa. I'm just looking there's a lot of questions coming in right now. So let me take a look and see what we have here. It looks like Julie from Durango, Colorado, we're going to ask you to come on. So in just a moment, you should see ask to enable your video and audio, and please press yes when it asks you, and you'll be coming on in just a moment. Julie from Durango, Colorado. See.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay.
She's popped up. The mic is muted. Yeah.
There we go. Hi, Julie. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having me. Hi. Thupten Jinpa, I thank you so much, and I really appreciated the Science and Wisdom of Emotion Summit. Also, that was aired recently.
Thank you.
So my question is, I'm a therapist and I work with children and teenagers, and I'm seeing a lot of despair and depression. And it seems like that is a block toward compassion, especially self-compassion. And sometimes there's not even enough energy to, even generate trying to tap into that. So I wondered if you had any suggestions or ideas about working with that energy.
That's a very challenging one. That's one of the things that has really been a major concern for me during the pandemic, because normally many of the things that buffer us against any potential mental problem is the social network and support that we rely on. So especially at a young age, that's why the friendship is so crucial, and acceptance among the friends and so on. And the pandemic has prevented that opportunity. So, and sometimes, when these kind of situations happen, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, asking them to use their mind again, even further is more of a challenge than actually kind of a source of strength. So I think maybe, one of the things that you could do is to see if there are ways in which you can use visualization. Like imagine, for example, like My wife teaches social emotional learning at a school, and one of the things that she teaches is what they call a kind of a secret garden. So each child is asked to imagine their own garden, and that is their place of safety. That is their place of joy. And then children can be very imaginative, and since it belongs to them, they don't have to share what's in it, how it looks like, I think. And so that kind of teaching using imagination may be one way of doing it, because you are asking them to use their playfulness. And in the Buddhist tradition, we also use visualization a lot. And visualizations with certain types of colors and so on, but we don't need to do that. But I think inviting children to create their own safe, quiet zone, and once they're able to do it, then every now and then when they're feeling distressed, invite them to go back there, just rejuvenate and find, ground themselves. That's one way of doing it. But then, of course, as children get more and more vaccinated, then I think parents should really allow real physical interaction, because nothing beats physical interaction in terms of giving that sense of support, sense of security, sense of acceptance, and not feeling lonely. At that age, I think, thoughts and ideas alone is not going to do it. I mean, as we are older, then of course we have learned to apply our thoughts. But at the young age, I think it's really the social experience. But at the moment, of course, it's a challenging one. But during this period, one important skill that you could teach them is some ability to self-calm themselves through, breathing, or, even just some physical movement, as well as visualization. I would, if my children were small right now, I would do that,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm on the right track.
Thank you. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so our next question, it looks like, is from Sally in Australia. Sally, you'll be seeing the same message to enable your video and audio. Please click yes to both, and then you'll be joining us in just a moment.
Yeah.
Hi, Sally.
Hello. Thank you so much for hosting Awake Network. It's a deep honor to be with you, Thupten Jinpa. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing with us. My question is, I sometimes struggle to, with certain people in certain situations where I feel like there is a great deal of harm and suffering being caused towards people and also towards the environment. I find myself, when I really try to hold compassion, underneath it is quite strong aversion. And I was wondering if you have any tools or techniques that might help me to feel that compassion for people, even when I see or feel that they're causing a great deal of harm.
Oh, Jinpa, it looks like you're muted.
There. I just, something happened with the hosting and co-hosting type. Thank you for the question. I think that's a very, very difficult one. I think with compassion training, the Tibetan tradition suggests that we take it easy. So that's why we begin with a loved one. And because, with loved ones, and in fact, not just a loved one, but an easy target. Like, for example, if you are a parent, if you have a teenage kid that you are having a conflicted person, parenting issues right now, then that child is not the right, easy target. So for parents, infant child is very easy. So I think the idea here is to really allow our natural capacity to arise as they do, and then bring our awareness. And then gradually, because we know what it feels like, we are then able to move a step beyond and get closer. Now, for difficult persons, I think initially, I make distinction between compassion as a feeling and compassion as an attitude and compassion as a perspective. Compassion as a feeling is very, very tough because emotions, they either show up or they don't show up. We cannot will them. Attitudes, we can will them because it's conscious. And even though it may not immediately arise, but choosing to adopt a more compassionate and understanding attitude, then attitudes may show. So I think with difficult people in our life, and of course, during the last administration, in the US, many of my friends had huge issues with what was going on. So I think in those kind of situations, I think working at the level of attitude first is a better strategy, because otherwise, if you expect the feeling to arise, the bar gets too high. Yeah. And in any case, the feelings, there's a reason why, compassion requires a concrete human being initially when it arises. As it evolves, I think it's more like a justice, the idea of justice being blind. It doesn't, so similarly, highest form of compassion is really not directed towards any particular individual. It's a universal compassion. But to get there, we have to go through the concrete steps. So I think working at the level of difficult people right at the beginning is just too tough. So there, I think, bringing compassion attitude and reminding yourself their humanity, shared humanity. They're too, a lot of people do things not because they are evil by nature, but they don't know a better way of doing things. And so I think just, this is where Marshall Rosenberg's kind of, insight that, any strong emotion is an expression of an unmet need is a powerful idea. I think just being those kind of understanding helps us. So we don't want to condone the action. So that's the important one, because sometimes people coming from the Buddhist influence tend to think that we should be like a kind of okay with anything goes, but that's not true. We really need to stand firm, oppose the injustice, but from a place where we don't forget the humanity of the people that we are opposing as well. So I think working initially at the level of attitude is probably a smarter way.
That's wonderfully helpful. Thank you so much. Almost a compassion and attitude as a starting point. I'll work on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. That was the question we heard echoed by a lot of people in
wonderful. Yeah.
And so we have so many questions coming in, but I see we're also at the end of the hour. And so, Jinpa, I was wondering, I had let people know that we'd be able to hear a little bit about your course. And so I was wondering if we might be able to take a moment for that. And if you'd be available to stick around,
sure.
Maybe one or two more questions after that.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I wanted to take a moment to share a little bit with those watching about your course, as I'm sure people are appreciating learning from you on this call and wanted to give another way that folks might continue. And so I know that in addition to your 8-week compassion training course that you created at Stanford, you've also created this 2-week course that you're offering that's very, very accessible to folks, both in the amount of time that it takes to do and this wonderful sliding scale way that you've set it up so that it's very accessible financially, and that it includes both sessions throughout the week as well as a live call aspect and interaction as a cohort, and that'll be starting on the 31st in just over a week. So I'd love to hear just a little bit from you about the course and what inspired you to create it, so that we can share that information with everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. The reason why I created that course is because, of course, as you mentioned, I developed the 8-week CCT, but 8-week CCT demands a lot of commitment time-wise. So it's a 2-hour session once a week over a period of 8 weeks. So I found that, for quite a lot of people, just the commitment of time over that period at a fixed time was a major obstacle. And secondly, because these are given by live teachers, who also need to be present. There's for quite a lot of people, it's also affordability issue as well. And then furthermore, the 8-week classes also involve quite a lot of contemplative practice, because it's really a comprehensive, kind of a spiritual cultivation journey. So I felt that maybe what is needed for a lot of people is a kind of a more accessible kind of, you remember those books called, Made Easy, something made easy, kind of, Einstein's theory of relativity made easy kind of type. So I thought, if I can develop a course that would really not demand too much, contemplative practice time, and that can be, the courses themselves can be done by individuals at their own leisure and pace. But at the same time, it brings a comprehensive focus on compassion, so that by the end of it, individuals will come out thinking, yes, I know what he's trying to say. I know this thing. And so it's almost like kind of coming out of that course, you would see yourself in a new light. You will recognize qualities in you that you haven't paid much attention before. So it's a 6-part course. The classes themselves are not very long, about 45 minutes long, the actual talk itself, followed by a Q&A recorded. And then there are supporting material that we recommend. Again, some of them are audio meditation guides, but it's up to the individual. But it builds over. So for example, there are actually 6 sessions, but split, and I really wanted to deliver it as a cohort system designed, because the idea is a large part of the compassion experience is relational. And as much as people can be part of a community, sharing a common journey, and they could be a horizontal peer-to-peer learning, then that experience becomes very different. And so this is how it has been designed, so that we pace it over a period of 2 weeks, and at the end of which the participants will have a chance to sit down with me for 90 minutes or something, and to really go through the questions they have in a kind of a more in-depth way. So I look at, the first one is a connection between compassion and happiness and well-being. That's an important one. And second is, how we experience compassion when it naturally shows up. So there are three modes of compassion. One is compassion for others, compassion from others, and self-directed compassion. So those are, they are all the same impulse, but they are, experienced differently. So looking at this. And then the third class session is really about looking at the fears and blockages that we bring, some of which are cultural, some of which are personal, because each of us has very different personal experience of growing up. So, and we are human beings who carry the conditionings of what we went through from childhood up to now. And because of this, we each have our own narrative and story. And these influence the way in which we relate to issues like compassion and so forth. So we talk about the fears of compassion and blockages that we bring. And then finally, in session 4, we ask the question, we step back, go to the head and ask, what exactly is this thing called compassion? So this is really a kind of a definition, what compassion is and what compassion isn't. And then in session 5, we finally talk about the compassion training. How can we then bring a more systematic approach to now making this more conscious? And then the session is now practical, tools that we can adopt in our day-to-day life. How can we make this a more active force? Because unless we do that, we tend to leave it at the level of response, which then becomes, at the mercy of a situation. The situation triggers, we feel compassionate, and we do something. If the situation doesn't trigger, then we move on. But we can choose to make it a more active force, so that we can relate to situations proactively by using compassion. That really changes. And this is where the difference lies between someone who has gone through the training and paid attention and someone who just lets compassion show up and then move on. So I think, so that's the final session.
Thank you so much, Jinpa. And thank you for the generosity and intention that you've created this course with. It's really amazing and such a comprehensive overview of compassion. And so I think Awake Network folks, if you could go ahead and share the link for the course in the Zoom chat, on the YouTube chat where some folks are watching, and then also on the Awake Network website in the comments. And if you're watching this as a recording, we'll make sure to put a link below the video so that it's really easy to access. It starts on the 31st in just less than a week. If you're interested in this, I really encourage you to check it out. There is a limited size for the first cohort and for each cohort because, as Jinpa mentioned, the interactive aspects of it to keep a sense of community and allow that to happen. So if you're not able to get into this one, there will also be a waiting list, and those the next cohort times will be coming out soon as well, in case you're interested in attending later.
And then the course platform that the Compassion Institute has developed facilitates a kind of a peer-to-peer sharing, so that I think there's as much as, there's a learning going on, but also in some cases, the most interesting learning and meaningful learning happens from peer to peer. So that, the platform facilitates that as well.
Yeah, so for those of you that want to check that out, you'll find the links now. They should be in all those different chats. And again, we'll put them on the website as well. And so it looks like we have one more question.
Sure.
I'm going to read it here from, this one's not going to be, it is going to be live. We couldn't find her before, but it looks like we've found Barbara from Geneva, Switzerland. If you're hearing me say this, we're going to bring you on in just a moment. So click enable to video and audio when asked, and we'll see you in just a moment. Here she is.
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Barbara. Thanks.
Hello.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for your wisdom and for your practice. And I'm also very grateful for this general offering from the Awake Network. And my question is, what is your experience? How can we facilitate cultivation of collective compassion and collective awakening so urgent, necessary these days? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And also, let me take this opportunity to thank you all for, especially those who are joining from such a faraway places where I know it's very dark and late, and, taking the time to be part of this community conversation. Now, the question you are asking is a very difficult one because, I draw my insights and knowledge and experiences and practical tools primarily from the Buddhist tradition, which is where I come from. And with the aim of, I see my role as someone who's translating across the traditional resource to the contemporary kind of society and need. But these traditions are really good when it comes to personal level development. Because there's a deep insight into the human nature, human psychology, spiritual potential, and all the rest. But traditions like Buddhism and other spiritual traditions has not much to say on how we can bring it at the level of a society, because we know systems are complex, and at systems level, we need to bring in complex causation principles. So I think it's a tough one, but my own sense is, for example, like through the Compassion Institute, what we are trying to do is we are trying to be very strategic. So we are going into healthcare, which is a world in itself, and trying to bring compassion in an explicit way in that community. We are going in education, particularly the teacher education, in collaboration with Colorado University and the Wellness Institute, the Rene Crown Institute there. And so we're being very strategic. And then also Compassion Institute has collaboration on law enforcement, bringing compassion into the law enforcement. So I think, I think it's going to be a complex process where nonprofits like Compassion Institute and others adopt strategic approaches to bringing into key sectors.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think we also need to develop a public discourse
Mm-hmm.
where compassion as a principle really is constantly called upon. For example, like there was a parliamentary group in the UK. I don't know what happened later, but a question was raised about the potential of including, just as we include human rights, respect for human rights as a part of an evaluation method, we should also include compassion as an evaluation method for the veracity of a policy that is being adopted. Now, that means how does it affect disproportionately the poor and the weaker and unprotected? Because one important principle of compassion is, of course, compassion is needed for all beings, but if you take compassion seriously, you need to pay special attention to the ones who need immediately, the underserved, the poorer, the oppressed. So I think there was a suggestion. I think that was an interesting suggestion. So those things need to happen. And also my hope is that some of the fundamental assumptions made in structuring our modern society, I'm particularly thinking about modern Western society, which has been the model for many people, it has been powerful in bringing concepts like human rights and individual, freedom and so forth as part of structuring society. But it has not been able to bring more communal values like compassion into the structuring of society. We see in Scandinavian countries some attempts to bring it so that you do it through a more equitable taxation system, so that overall the general population do not suffer. So I think something like that has to happen, where compassion becomes an important consideration in the very decisions that are part of a policy making. So I think it has to happen at multiple levels, horizontally by individuals, bottom up from individuals, horizontally through these strategic approaches in the sectors, and then top down from policy and public discourse. But I think there is a new awakening. I think there is, and I would argue part of the crisis that is being felt in the capitalist systems, democratic capitalist system, is partly the failure of not having taken compassion seriously. And if, and the democratic system, the liberal democratic system is the only viable compassionate system that is there, to be fair. But for it to survive, I think it now needs to take compassion explicitly. Because until now, it has taken aspects of it, like human rights, respect for individual, dignity of the individual, but it hasn't taken compassion explicitly. So I think these are ways in which I think people are beginning to pay attention. I'm hopeful.
Yeah, thank you very much. As I mentioned, I'm based in Geneva, and you may know this week, actually, the World Health Organization is having its annual assembly. And I would only wish that they would be listening to us and they would bring the compassion into their leadership, for more unity in what is being discussed about the pandemic and much beyond, for the well-being of society and the planet.
Definitely.
That's really missing at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And it has been shown in the way in which the disproportionate inequality of the vaccine access, in the world. I mean, it's been, for me, watching from, North America, the way in which the Western democratic countries handle this whole vaccine issue was, very discouraging,
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So it looks like we're a bit beyond time. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for showing up and practicing together and exploring how we can bring more compassion into our lives. And an extra thank you to everyone for all of your dynamic questions. And of course, thank you so much, Jinpa, for sharing your big heart and wisdom with us today. And are there any words you'd like to leave us with as we close?
Well, thank you. I mean, let me thank you, Kaylee, and once again for really opening up the Awake Networks community to us, the Compassion Institute, and offering me a possibility to interact. I would also like to thank all of you who have joined, some of you from Australia, Europe, and possibly from Asia, where the time zones are really, weird right now. But this is, for me, it's very inspiring and encouraging, because it shows that there's this aspiration for a more compassionate vision of the world is universally shared. And I would like to ask you all to be active advocates of compassion, and by creating a more compassionate society, everyone stands to benefit, including the animals and planets, animals that share the same planet with us, and of course the planet itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jinpa. And just as a reminder, we'll have the link to that course that we had mentioned earlier below this video on the page for anyone that wants to check it out. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Jinpa.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.